Hello, my name is Velda Kiara. I am a software engineer. I have contributed to open source. That's why I'm actually here. I'm also a Microsoft MVP for Python and web technologies. I currently serve as a DEFNA director, which is the Django Events Foundation North America. And I also serve as the vice executor for Black Python Devs, which is a community for Black Python developers globally. And I am part of Django Space. So Django Space is an open source program for contributors who want to contribute to the Django ecosystem. And I am currently a star. So I actually started to contribute to Django Debug Toolbar during the Django Space program, other than contributing to other Python-related repos. Today we're gonna talk about how to optimize Django using the debug toolbar. The first thing that we're going to look at is the feature and functionality, how to install and configure the toolbar, what the panels are, how to detect slow queries, how to optimize the said slow queries, to boost templates, what the cache panel does, and what the signal panel does. So why should you use the Django Debug Toolbar? Well, first of all, you don't have to necessarily go through your app and inspect your code to look for bugs, so that enhances your debugging process. And the other thing is it also makes it efficient as well, because you also don't need to go on looking for your logs. And it gives you performance insights because it gives you metrics of how exactly your app is functioning and all that happens internally. Some of the features and functionalities include having the request and response information, which means you get the get, post, and session data that you need. And then you're able to see how efficient your queries are by seeing the runtime of your queries. You're also able to see templates used in a particular context, if you're using the actual templates or if you're using other static files. And then you're also able to see caching information, which is hits and misses and the settings that you have on your cache. You're also able to see profiling, where you visualize the performance of your views and your templates, and you can easily customize your panels. If you don't like a certain panel, just focus on what you need. So how do you do it? It's a Python library, so you can easily install it through pip install. And like all installed apps in Django, you need to add it to your installed app so that Django recognizes, oh, we have this and we need to run it as well. You will need to add it to your project URLs, which is, this way is kind of like a biased way. You could either add it as I have added it, or you could use the include and just include your debug toolbar URLs. So you can, this way is subjective. You can easily use whatever URL pattern that you're comfortable with for consistency in your database. And also do not forget to add the middleware, because the middleware allows Django to see it actually is the hook that shows like this is what is needed in the response and in the requests. You need to define your IP by default. It uses your local host, which is 127.0.0.1. But if you're also using Docker, you'd need to assign a different IP for that as well. And since it's debugging, you should not run this in production, obviously. And your debug needs to be true. And yeah, it follows everything in your settings.file. The files are actually at the top, just in case I forgot to mention where something goes. And yeah, and now that we're talking about optimization, your app needs to exist. We can't optimize air. And this particular app is actually an app that portrays characters from the Atlantis movie from Disney about Atlantis, the lost city. I decided to use my creativity by using characters that I know. And the homepage is actually just my speaker banner. And once your toolbar, or I'm going to use toolbar because Django Debug Toolbar is too long. And DJDT is also somehow long. So yeah, this is how your app should look like once it's set up. That is, if you follow the URLs, the middleware, and if it's not appearing, something's wrong. You need to end up in this spot. So first things first, the history is on the right. You can see the history. You can avoid the toggle theme. That's if you want to change the theme. You could also hide it, and then you could leave like a small square on the side which shows DJDT, which is like the hyphenated, the acronymated name. And when you look at the history panel, what it shows is it shows you the history of the requests made. So if you want to view the history of previous requests and see what went wrong or how you could run it to get previous information, the history panel is where you should go to. We have the versions panel that shows the different versions of dependencies that you have. If you're using Python, Django, and every other dependency that you have, it's mainly used if you detect that there is a discrepancy in compatibility issues of your libraries. We all tend to use a lot of libraries than we should. We have the timer panel, which shows how long the particular request took. And it's efficient because it shows you how slow or how fast a query is and the response time. Because as users, when I click to a website, I want to see it immediately. I don't want to take hours or even 10 seconds. We have the settings panel after the time panel, which displays the settings from your settings.py file. And it helps you see the active settings and configurations without actually opening up the file. We have the headers panel that shows HTTP request and response headers, which helps when you're debugging issues with HTTP headers or cookies or CORS. We do not like CORS issues. We have the request panel, which now displays details about your GET, POST, cookies, and session variables. It's useful to track data, what happens, or the data that passes through the client and server information, more so like form submissions and all that. We have the SQL panel that lists now all the SQL queries that are being executed and also allows you to see which queries are inefficient and which ones could use some help. The static files panel displays the static files used during the request and the different locations they are. That is the path of the template or any other static files you have. And they allow you to see if there are any misconfigurations in your static files. The template also does the same way, but it's mainly for debugging in case you miss a context of a particular template or if you have not defined a correct path for your templates. The alerts panel shows you any alerts that you have. For example, if you're having forms and you forget to define the ink type, if you have input fields in your forms, does not allow you to have file uploads basically. And the cache panel allows you to see if there are any caching issues you have, any inefficient caches you have, or if there are any misses or hits. The signals panel lists all the triggered signals that are going on in your application, and it's useful if you want to know all the signals that are taking place in your application and if there are any issues with some of the signals. The redirect and profiling are at the bottom, so they're not that active by default because the profiling panel is resource intensive and it kind of takes on more resources than it should, so you only enable it when you need it. And you can do that using the disable configuration settings. So, how does my app look like? My app just has the character model, which takes in an ID, a name, a description, and a role. The role is the character can be a protagonist, an antagonist, or just a regular supporting character. So common issues common performance issues in Django apps include the N+1 query problem, which means a single query is executed multiple times than is needed, which leads to degradation, especially if you have a load of data. If you also haven't like cached your templates or have templates with logic which is inefficient, it delays the pages from loading, and then now everybody's not complaining because the data is not loading as it should. Also, if you excessively query your database without having some form of using a cache or something else that actually optimizes or reduces the database queries, then that leads to an increased latency, which means an decreased in performance. Also, lack of caching decreases the performance. And now that we know how the app should look like, let's look into how the queries perform. So that's actually an equal sign here. It kind of got lost, but you can imagine it. You can picture that it's there. So the character list is supposed to actually fetch all the characters, and this is how the first query looks like. And if I wanted to check if I can get the role of the particular character, I would have to now run another query and be like, okay, now give me the role of this particular character. But now that we've already talked about n+1 query, how to actually solve this is by using two things. You can either use prefetch related or select related. And all this depends on the kind of relationship that your model has. So we use prefetch related when you have many-to-many relationships and you want to fetch all the related data in one query instead of having multiple queries. But in my case, since I just have like one-to-one relationships with the different models, I would use select related. And this is how the SQL panel actually looks like. I'm going to try to zoom into that, to the most important part. Yeah, this is how you see what the query actually does and the most important information in this case. Other than that, you should also look at, just a second, you should also pay attention to, since you're on the SQL panel, you need to see like the runtime, because I mean, it's metrics, and performance is basically a numbers game where we get to know how much or how long a particular request takes. So this particular query got 0.78 milliseconds. Let's see if we optimize it, how long it should take or how long it would take. So now, since I mentioned that we're supposed to use select related, so we fetch all the characters information, but we also fetch what role they're going to have. Are they a protagonist? Are they an antagonist? Are they a supporting character? Like, where are they? Select related is actually here, so it's .select related. And if we now want to see what it does, yeah, too zoomed in. Yeah, this is what you need to be paying attention to. So what happens if you use select related is that it joins all these tables together in SQL. And it actually tells you how it joins them. It's like from this, join, after getting the ID also join whether it's an antagonist, it's a protagonist, or it's a supporting character. All this in one single query. And guess how long it takes? Let's see. It takes 0.74 milliseconds. And this is simple data, like this is not a lot of characters we're dealing with. So if we're having loads and loads of data, it means it's significantly faster. How do we boost template rendering performances? Well, first of all, keep all business logic away from your templates. We're not trying to do calculation in templates, like that's for your logic, right? We just want to see what files we want to see. We want to see all the data, but we're not trying to do a lot of mental mathematics where we're working with templates. Another thing is use caching. So caching can be a good thing and a bad thing. Good thing if you use it correctly, like have good timelines, whether if it's using your views or you're caching on your templates or you're actually doing it on the whole app on your settings file. And you need to pay attention to all this, because if you cache in your settings a different number and your template is also a different number, then that there's some staleness in data, because now you're overly caching and sometimes it gets confusing. So I was a victim of this a while ago, where I had different times of caching, and every time my page, my actual template would load, and it would take a significant amount of time. And I was like, what's going on? Like, it should be immediate. And then I realized that I wasn't doing it as it should. And then another thing is you want to continuously monitor your optimizations, because how do you know it works if you didn't know? Like, if it didn't work previously, you need to monitor, like, is it working now? What can I do to make it better? And when you made it better, was it actually better, or did you make it significantly worse? Now, we're looking at how to actually boost our template. And this example, it's a simple template, as I mentioned. It just defines the different characters they are. And it does not incorporate business logic, so that's spot on. And this is how it looks like. So the colors are as should be in your template, so don't be worried about the coloring. It's just black and just a blue color. It also shows you the actual file or the template here. Let me just zoom in a bit. Yeah, it shows you the actual path, where the file is located. So if the template wasn't showing up, I would definitely look up that actual file and see if the data is as should. And this template took a time of 14.09 milliseconds. Well, not too bad for small data, but let's see. What if we implement caching? So this is how you actually cache your templates, by assigning numbers, and the number is actually in seconds. So this is fairly large. Do not recommend, but if you do need to use it, you can still use the same number. And then let's see how long this particular page takes. So this page takes slightly faster based on the cache time. Let me zoom in to here. Can you see the time? Oh, no, I need to zoom in just a bit. Yeah, so this one takes 10.13 milliseconds, and the previous one was like 14.09, which means it's like 3.96 milliseconds faster. So yeah, numbers game. So 3.96 milliseconds is faster for this particular data, but as well, if you have loads and loads of data, that means it's gonna be significantly better than it is. Now that we've talked about caching, what more can I do with caching using the Django Debug Toolbar? Well, first of all, it reduces database load, and it also improves the response times. And the toolbar actually shows you how the duration of the cache storage that you have, and how many hits that your cache has had, and how many misses your cache has not had. So what are the hits and misses? So the hits in this particular case show how many times a requested item was actually found in the cache. And the misses indicate how many times the requested item was not found. And once the requested item is not found, it results in a fallback to the database where now a new request is made. The hit rate in this particular context also refers to how effective your caching is. If you are having a higher hit rate, that means how effective your caching works. And if you're having a high miss rate, then that means your strategy actually needs more adjustment so that you have more hits. We're going to now look at signals. So signals are a way of your application to communicate with each other without tightly coupling. So the signals allow your components to react to specific events. So if you want to run migrations and have a signal that says, okay, migrations are done, this is where you do all that. And common signals, or how signals work, is first of all, you need to emit the signal. That is, define a specific action that you want the signal to do, and then create an email, whether you want to create an email or create a user or run migrations or delete particular users, then do that. And then to actually define it in Django, you need to have or use a @receiver decorator that allows you to register that function as a signal. Once all that happens, once you've emitted a signal, you've registered using the @receiver decorator, you now need to handle it by are you sending notifications to the person who's maintaining the application, or how exactly, whether you're logging events, sending notifications, or all that. So common signals in Django include the class prepared signal, which is actually here. Let me just zoom in a little bit. Oops. Yeah. These are the common ones. Currently, the app is running 38 receivers of 15 signals, and all these signals signify that all of them that the class prepared has run, the settings has changed if I'm doing any migrations that has happened. So the common ones, as I was mentioning, is the class prepared description, which is a signal sent when a model class is fully prepared, because we have models in our app. And then we have the connection created, which is a signal sent when there is a new database connection created. The GOT request exception is where it's actually sent when an exception is raised during the processing of a request. If you're having any errors, or there needs to be notifications or cleanups that needs to happen, that is what is sent. The M2M changed is a signal that is sent when a many-to-many relationship has changed or been modified. The post-delete description is sent where a model instance is deleted. So if I went back and deleted the protagonist or antagonist, then this signal would have to be sent. Post-migrate is a signal that is sent after migration operations, and where every time you're changing anything in your models, then at some point you need to run your migration so there's consistency of data. So how we want to see how the actual function of a signal works. So this is what I said about having the @receiver decorator, and what happens is every time I create a character, like if I want to add a different character in my app, in my Atlantis app, I can easily get a signal sent to me through a notification system, or I can just let it alert it. I can have it in my logs to say, okay, at this particular instance, this is a particular character that was created. So one thing I want to mention about signals is do not use signals for tasks that can be handled directly by views or models, because then that makes it repetitive. Just use signals when you need a particular action triggered and when it's absolutely necessary. So if you'd like to contribute to the Django Debug Toolbar, I am actively also a maintainer of the toolbar, and if you need pointers, or if you're looking to start contributing to the toolbar itself, or if you actually have feedback about using the toolbar in your application, then let me know. So far, this is what I had. And I think we have plenty of time for questions. So this repo has the slides and all the code examples I was talking about, including the settings. I actually have the two settings defined, where if you want to use the plus debug to add your URLs, I prefer to use include because I want consistency in how my URLs are, and it's not so confusing. So yeah, any questions?
Looking at all the list of features in the toolbar on the right-hand side, my sort of first thought was that seems like a great sort of interface for adding plugins to, and so I wondered whether the Django Debug Toolbar has a sort of plugin system where you can add extra items to the toolbar.
It actually allows you to add different panels, third-party panels that you'd like to have. These are just the default ones that many people commonly use, but there when you look at the documentation, it lists where different ways or different third-party applications that you can add to it too. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Thanks very much. Really, really good talk. I'm just wondering if you use Django just as a server without the templates, is it still easy? Is it still possible to use Django Debug Toolbar? You know, display it somewhere.
No, thank you for asking that. You actually reminded me something that I was supposed to mention. So this only works if you're using the traditional default templates. If you're using something like a different architecture, let's say React or Vue or some other front-end framework, you would rather use Django Silk.
Okay.
Yeah, that works for different or separate architectures for the front-end and the back-end.
Okay, and that's another library, Django Silk.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
awesome.
it's
Thank you.
Django Silk. Thank you for that question.
Yes.
Wow. I'm getting cuts.
Thanks. Is it possible to enable the toolbar in production but behind some auth?
What?
Is it possible to enable the toolbar in production but behind some username and password to kind of make it a bit more secure but still kind of allow you to use these tools in production?
Well, I haven't used it because there's a disclaimer of not using it, but I would like to try actually. I'll try it and let you know how that works out.
Yes.
Oh my good Lord. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
I'm sorry, just on, you mentioned Django Silk there.
Yeah.
What is that? Is that another version of the toolbar? Is it a version of Django, or is it just an additional package that would allow you to use it when you have a front end that's been taken over by, for example, our app uses Angular, which I think uses, off the top of my head, is Angle 4200. But I know that if we manually change the port to 8000, we get the toolbar back.
Okay, so it's actually kind of it's basically also a third-party app for Django applications. So it was also built because Django Debug Toolbar just uses the traditional templates, but now there was a need to replicate the same, but for now different applications. So it's also friendly to use, but yes, it's an additional package that you need to install.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Oh my days.
Any other questions? Okay, sure.
Okay, I can start taking Django questions too. I realized that we just talked about the toolbar, but you also have Django questions. I'd be open to that.
Okay, so you spoke about caching. I know very well that caching doesn't really update your data, so it gives you very old data, even if it makes your response time very fast. So how do you tend to maybe you have a data set and you really want to get new data every time you refresh. How do you avoid the caching from just giving you the snapshot of the old data that you had? Yeah, and maybe you have done a function that maybe refreshes the cache, but you still fall into the problem. So how do you do it?
Okay, that's more or less a question on stillness of the data that is stored in your cache. So it happens when, as I mentioned, I also had this issue of I was overly caching and I wasn't getting the data that I needed at the right time, and I used to wait a couple of seconds more. I would say you could either reduce the time that you're caching or use different other ways using CDNs and all that. But I do recommend caching because it stores frequently accessed data. That means if the user is actively accessing that particular portion of the data that you have, you would need to, I would say reduce the caching time and then see how that works over time. Yeah, because at some level you'd still need to cache. It's not something we could escape, but we could avoid, here you could avoid having your templates being cached and just do it in your settings file where you have more control over the timeline and where you actually want it to be instead of caching your templates. So it's more or less evaluating what works for you at the time by trying out different methods. It's optimization. It's not one size fits all. It's, this is my app. Let me figure out how to make it faster by using already what you have and evaluating that and trying to make it better. Yeah, I hope that helps. Thank you.
Any more questions? If not, maybe another round of applause for Velda, please. Thank you.